In this series, I'm going to give you pro tips on individual and team communication using the SBI model, or the Situation Behavior Impact Model, founded by the Center for Creative Leadership. Sometimes giving feedback is one of the hardest things we might do, but it's one of the best ways for us to bring awareness to situations and make them better. And so the more clear you can be in your communication and how you give feedback, the more you hope that it will resonate with the person you're offering the feedback to. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the SBI model. First, we start with the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So let me build upon these ideas. The situation is where we define the situation, and it puts the feedback into the context of a scenario so the other person has a specific setting as a reference rather than something that's just very general and not very useful when they try to anchor themselves on where the actual event or situation occurred. For example, during the meeting this morning when you spoke about the new change management process, in this scenario, I've been very specific about the time and place where the feedback occurred. Behavior. Describe the specific behaviors you want to address. You must communicate behaviors that can be directly observed, verbal and nonverbal signals. An example of this would be, you confidently provided clear recommendations supported by data and industry best practices of how to deal with the increase of associate complaints. I've been very specific with this person about what we're talking about and what sorts of behaviors we observed in this meeting so that there's no ambiguity or uncertainty about what was witnessed with regard to the behavior. Lastly, impact. Describe how the other person's action has affected you and others and how you and others behaved as a result of the observed behavior. Example, the team was comfortable with your recommendations. As a result, we will be able to take quick action to resolve issues. This is the scenario where we show what is the desired output that we want to see, whether it's good feedback or challenging feedback. And so really this impact shows up as what are the measurable changes that has happened as a result of the way that you behaved in a certain situation or scenario. Hopefully this gives you some grounding on how to use the SBI feedback model. Common no's in giving feedback. Feedback that judges people, not actions, often leads to somebody being defensive. Sometimes feedback is too vague, and so it's not really actionable for the person that's getting feedback. And so it can be very frustrating for that person when they can't act upon it, and they don't understand when it happened or why they're getting the feedback. Feedback speaks for others rather than the first person. Another way that people often give feedback without being certain if this is the way people want their feedback is to give negative feedback in a sandwich. So they start off with something positive, then they talk about what they really want to talk about as negative feedback, and then go back to something positive to close it out. Sometimes this is a great approach. Sometimes it's not preferred. Some people like direct communication. So it's best to ask somebody, how would you like me to give you some feedback that I have to share? Sometimes we give feedback as an absolute, always or never, whereas often we know that feedback or situations and behaviors show up sometimes or often, but not always or never. And so how do you give feedback in a way that isn't so general? And so that's, again, where you want to make sure that you emphasize the situation and the timing so that people can really relate to the feedback you have to offer. Sometimes feedback is used where we make assumptions about what the intention was behind the behavior, and sometimes that leads to unintended consequences. It's really best to focus on what's the behavior that was witnessed and what was the impact, rather than try to interpret what the person that you're giving the feedback to really intended. Let them explain why they did what they did so that you can understand maybe a different perspective that they would like to share. Often feedback goes on too long. Once you've said what you need to say, it's time to pause and listen for the person who you're giving the feedback to, have an opportunity to let it resonate and give some reflection before you continue to. And be careful to make sure that you don't give feedback that implies a threat, because this often leads to the person being defensive And once they become defensive, their ears have shut down and they go on to attack mode along with you. And so this is a way that situations often get spun up if they feel like they're being threatened in the communication and the feedback that you have to offer. Finally, feedback that uses inappropriate humor can sometimes be really unethical and inappropriate in a situation. So try not to sugarcoat things by using humor when you're really trying to deliver a serious message. Remember, feedback is often a gift, and sometimes people are willing to accept the feedback and sometimes they're not. So it's often important to start off with, I have some feedback to offer you. Are you willing to listen? Hopefully these ideas have been helpful to you in the future feedback that you offer to colleagues and friends along the way.